Let me introduce to you the second speaker online today. He's Professor Senaka Rajapakse. He's the Director of Postgraduate Institute of Medicine and President-elect of Ceylon College of Physicians. Over to you, Professor.
Well, I'm trying to show some slides at the same time while I think you can see my picture in the background. It's better that you focus on the slides rather than me. But the most important thing about any presentation is that the important part of the presentation, the most important aspect of presentation, as Niranjan just mentioned, is yourself. So don't get carried away by slides. Slides are just an aid to your presentation. So my talk is a hybrid between talking about how to make some good slides for a scientific presentation and also about how to present them properly, because you, the speaker, you are the focus of the presentation, not the slides. The slides just help you illustrate some points and make them clear. So you actually don't need the slides. So I could do this talk without any slides. But when you make a scientific presentation, often there are facts to be presented, numbers, images, graphs, and things. So therefore, you do need some slides to help you through. The biggest mistake that most presenters make is to focus on fancy slides and not focus on what they're actually talking about. So I've been giving lectures, talks, presenting research presentations, I think it's probably about 25 years or more. But what you realize that if you look back over a period of years, you actually have a limited number of presentations you have done which have really stood out. And the aim should be to make every single presentation of yours a striking one which makes an impact on the audience and one which people will remember you for. So that is what this talk is about, on how to make that impact while presenting your findings in a scientific manner. It's not easy. And having listened to numerous presentations, again, I can recall only very few which held my attention. I basically hate lectures. I don't like to go and listen to a lecture. And it's only a few lectures which, to me, are worth actually spending the time and listening to. And most of the time, I leave the lecture hall and go and see what's happening in the lobby. So if you want to make an impact, you need to do a lot of things in preparation to do a good presentation. Now, some of you there's a large number of participants, probably one of the highest number of participants I've seen for a session like this, which is a well, it's not really something about COVID or dengue. So the traction for sessions like this is, I thought, lower than this, but we have about 350 participants, which is pretty good. Now, some of you are experienced people who have been presenting many times, who have probably dropped in to see if there are any extra tips they can pick up. There are also youngsters who are new to the field of presenting, who want to know how they can present their findings at a scientific conference. So the aim of this presentation is to cover all those different aspects. Now, in your lifetime, when you start off as a young new presenter, probably the commonest point where you will be called upon to make a presentation is where you are asked to submit your findings from a single research study to an audience. CCP, SLMA, whatever it is, it's basically a conference paper, usually a 10-minute presentation. As you become more well-known in your field and as you have done more work, you will then be called upon by somebody like the College of Physicians to present a review of current knowledge on a particular topic. That is what a plenary or a lecture is. So you are now a little higher up in the scale of things. And once you have done a lot of research and a lot of work in your lifetime, you may have to present a collection, the findings of a collection of your own studies, many studies put together and a story, and that is what an oration is. People often confuse these issues, these types of presentations, and it is important to understand that they are different, and you need to understand why you are doing a particular presentation before you actually embark on doing it. So I'm focusing mainly on scientific presentations, not public speaking, but public speaking is an important and integral part of doing a scientific presentation. Now you will see that the slides are very boring. There is no color, there is just white and there is black. Why do I use white and black? Most of the time I like to use white and black. It's simple and it doesn't distract the audience from the presenter and from the material that is presented. I'll go on later on to show you some really beautiful presentations where you are completely distracted from the actual facts. But white on black is good for the simple reason that it keeps the focus on the material, the stuff that's been talked about. And also, it is very easy to insert images and pictures and diagrams into a white background. Now, when you do a presentation, there are certain cardinal rules. First of all, you must know your stuff. Don't go unprepared. You must be ready with your stuff. You should know what you're going to talk about. You should have studied the subject and you should be an expert on what you're going to talk about. Some of the members in the audience had asked some questions. How do they get over stage fright? The best way to get over stage fright is to know what you are talking about. And when you look at that audience out there, you say, look, I know more about this topic, at least, than anybody else in this audience. So why should I be afraid of this audience? I know better than them. I know more than them. And if they ask a question, the likelihood is that I will know the answer to it. If I don't, what's the big deal? Probably no one in the audience, except including the person who's asking the question, knows the answer. So there's nothing to be ashamed of not knowing the answer to everything, but you must know your stuff. You must be practiced and ready. You must also know yourself. Be confident, know what your strengths are, how you can sell your material better, and how you can cope with the different questions. So be a natural speaker. Speak the way you would normally speak to a group of colleagues who would like to know about what you have done. And the most important thing is know your audience. If you don't know whom you're speaking to and what they expect of this conversation, of this discussion, then you are a non-starter. You need to understand what does your audience know about the subject, what do they expect from this lecture, because everybody comes for a lecture expecting to take something away. If you do not give them what they have come to take away, then you have failed in your presentation. So know your audience, study your audience. If you are speaking to a group of molecular biology researchers, then it will be fine to throw in terms like IgG4 and TNF-alpha and all sorts of things like that. But if you are speaking to something like the medical association, the Sri Lanka Medical Association, where it's a diverse group of people coming from various different disciplines, then you need to pitch your speech, your talk, to that audience so that they can understand it. Because the art of a good presentation is to take a complicated subject and make it simple, make it easy to understand, and make it delightful to understand. Right. So plan what you're going to say in advance. You need to know, what am I going to say in this presentation? Why am I saying it? What do I expect the audience to understand from this presentation? I'm not trying to talk to them about the fine details of some molecular biological experiment, but I want to tell them that this is something important which they can adapt into practice or learn something more about in the future. So the most important step in your plan, in your presentation, is planning. Why are you saying what you have to say? What do you want the audience to get out of it? What is the key message? To whom are you saying it? Are you saying it to a person who is an expert in the field, who will understand all the terminology? Are you speaking to a group of medical students who know a little bit but don't know much about what you're saying? Are you speaking to a lay audience where it has to be pitched at a completely different level? What is the scope of your talk? Are you going to talk very broadly about everything? Are you going to give an overview of things? Or are you going to give a very focused talk on a particular area of the subject? So you need to determine what the scope of your talk is. Frame the key questions, because a talk is all about questions. You have a question to answer, or rather the audience has a question to be answered, and you need to design your talk to answer those questions. So when I go for a lecture and I want to new developments in dengue, and I see this lecture, right, so there are new developments in dengue, and I want to know about them. If I go there and come back without knowing the answers to any of the questions that I have in my mind, then the talk is basically useless. So when you plan a talk, frame the questions that you think the audience will want to know the answers to, and then you will be fine. And think how you can engage the audience. So engaging the audience is a difficult thing. I know this because I am one of the most difficult people to engage. As I said, hate lectures. So when I go and sit down at a lecture, as Niranjan said, the first few minutes are crucial. The speaker needs to take the audience's attention and grab it and hold it through the speech. So time is important. Someone asked the question of what do you want to have distractors in the middle of your presentation while you're speaking? If it's a long presentation, then do you want to have breaks in between where you show an archaeological picture or a picture of wildlife or something, just to take the audience attention away? My answer to that is your presentation should not be long. 40 minutes is an optimal period for a presentation. If you go on beyond that, it becomes boring. So the best way to engage the audience is to pitch your talk to what the audience wants. Try to answer the questions that the audience has asked. You don't know what the questions are because you are framing the questions, but you are actually anticipating what questions the audience wants to know the answers to. And think how you can engage the audience and keep their attention. So time is always limited. You don't have unlimited time to hold your audience's attention. So therefore, you must decide when you are going to talk whether you are going to confine yourself to what you must know about the topic. Then think about whether you want to add stuff which is good to know, and stuff which is nice to know generally is better dealt with by offering some references or some pointers to journal articles which would give you more information. So normally when you present something, it is better to confine yourself to what the audience really must know about the topic. And show them what is good to know, show them what is nice to know, and show them how to find out what is good to know and what is nice to know. But time is of the essence, and if you mix the things that you must know with what is good to know and nice to know, you will end up running out of time, and you will find that the audience doesn't understand half the things you say. A presentation is a story. It's like a fairy tale. Like all good fairy tales, a presentation, just like a story, must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when you're going to talk about something, plan it in the form of a fairy tale. People like listening to fairy tales. They have a structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you need to think, how can I make what I'm going to talk about, turn it into a story? So what am I trying to say? What is the key message that I want to convey to this audience? Why am I saying it? What is the importance? Okay, so you found something complicated. You found that a particular virus behaves in a particular manner in vitro. But why am I telling it to you? What would you want to know about it? And why would I want to tell it to you? What is the impact? How well am I saying it? Am I saying it clearly in a way that you can understand? Or do I want to show off and say, look, I'm a great speaker, I'm a great researcher, and let me show you what I have done. And you go away saying he seems to have done some work, but I didn't understand a word of what he said. So how well you put your facts across is vitally important. Every time you decide on a particular area which you're going to talk about, a particular point, stop and think, how can I say it better? How can I make it more interesting to the audience? How can I make it clearer? How can I remove the nice to know stuff and bring in just the must know stuff? Because the less you say, the greater the impact what you say has. So think, stop and think when you're making your presentation and planning what you're going to say. If I say it like this, it will sound a little complicated. How can I say it better? How can I simplify it? And go back again and again through your presentation, thinking how you can make it better. How can I illustrate my point better is slightly different. It's not just what you say, but you can say something by giving a long description of what it is, or you can illustrate it with an image or a diagram or a video possible. So think, instead of just writing this out in a long sentence, how can I make my point clearer to the audience? You also need to think, what is the impact of what I have said? So I have said something, I've made a statement. What does it mean? How does it impact on society? How does it impact on the individual who is listening? How does it make, in medical terms, how does it make practice better? How does it improve things overall? So think about that and then design your presentation in order to make that impact that is desired. And always remember, what is the take-home message? At the end of the day, the audience goes back and thinks, what did I learn from this talk? It was, if you get the statement, it was a good talk and I got some important information from it, then your job is done. Sometimes I go back and think that was a wonderful speech, talk, but there was really no message. There was nothing new which was said. So that also should be avoided, because that is really bad, because you have talked basically nonsense. Let your presentation flow. As I said, it's a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it should flow in a logical sequence. Talk about one specific area at a time. Don't mix things up together. Take a particular area, talk about it, present it, get it over with, and then move to the next. There should be logical flow. Each step of your talk must connect to the next statement. There must be a flow through. There must be a sequence of things which the audience will understand. At each point of your presentation, highlight the key points that you have made. Say, this is what I'm trying to speak about. This is the point that I'm trying to make. And there's nothing wrong in actually reiterating that point and saying, this is what I want you to know from this particular part of the presentation. There is always the need for a balance between depth and breadth. So you can talk widely on a lot of things without going into great detail. And then you can talk in great depth about one particular aspect and not cover anything else. So that depends on what you have to say. It depends on what the topic you're presenting about. If you are talking about a very, very detailed, complicated thing, you might think, if I'm speaking to a non-specialist audience, I will give a broad overview of what I'm going to talk about. But if you are speaking to an expert audience, then the expert audience might want to know a great deal of depth, and they wouldn't be bothered about the breadth of the whole thing. So you need to strike that balance and decide what is the depth you want to go to and how broad you want to keep your talk. As I said, don't talk about too many things. Don't go into too much depth. If there is something else that needs to be known, then give some web links or give some references to more details. And always sum up at the end and say, in conclusion or in summary, this is what I have to say. This is what we found. These are the implications, and this is how we take it forward. Right. Now, very important, avoid jargon technicalities. People don't want to know that you know a lot of good, big, complicated words. They want you to put it to them in a simple, understandable format. So, as far as possible, avoid jargon, avoid complicated words. If you use a complicated word which you think is outside the scope of the audience, then by all means say what it is and say it in simple terms. Be humble and don't show off. The worst thing you can do is to try to show off, I have done this, I have done so much, I have done all this work. Let the audience judge whether you are the expert or not. If you present your material well, the audience will say, this guy knows what he is talking about. That is what you want to achieve. If you try to show off, the audience will probably think he is trying to show off, and he probably doesn't know all that he pretends to know. In other words, the empty vessel doesn't make a great noise. Be humble. Sorry, the empty vessel makes the greatest noise. Be humble and don't show off. If you ask a question and you don't know the answer, then by all means say, I'm sorry, I don't know. Perhaps someone in the audience can answer that question for me. Perhaps you, the person who is asking the question, might have some suggestions. There is nothing wrong in showing that you don't know because no one knows everything. When you present work which is done by a group of people, always use the term we. We have done this work rather than I did this. You sometimes find people who present orations where the study has been done by a team of about 100 people and the lead author comes and says, I have done this, as if he has done all the experiments himself. So wherever it's needed, show the audience that it is a group of us and not a single person. Acknowledge group efforts. And don't bluff. The worst thing you can do is to bluff, because if you bluff, everything that you've spoken about becomes a joke, and people think he is just bluffing, he didn't know the answer, he did a nice presentation, but he didn't have the humility to accept the difficulties and the shortcomings and the things that he doesn't know about. There are certain things you must not do. Do not be late. The worst thing you can do is everybody is waiting for the presentation. They're waiting for this great speaker to come in and he is late. And then he comes in and his slides, he's fumbling for the slides. He's looking for his USB drive. He plugs in his USB drive and says, my gosh, it's not there. And I have left the USB drive at home. There was actually a presenter who did that once and then went off home saying that he has left his CD at home. And the interesting part is he never appeared for the lecture and there was no lecture. Don't be silly. Appropriate targeted humor is good, but don't become a joker. Do not read the slides verbatim. Slides are not to be just read in sequence. You don't write a lot of things on the slides and then start reading them out. The slides are just a cue to what you have to say. Try to cover everything you know. Don't try to do that. Don't try to cover all that you have done. Select out what you need to talk about and speak only of that. Don't waste time on the introduction and outline because you might run out of time at the end. And don't go beyond your allocated time. Fundamentally, don't depend on PowerPoint. Just use it to illustrate what you want to say. What do you think of this slide? Beautiful. So much information. Lovely. Everything about dengue is there in it, in one single slide. And how many of you are going to read this? I would say none. There's too much information, there's too much stuff. You can't seriously expect a person to read this whole slide and try to understand it. It's far too much data. It's boring. If I wanted to read this, I'll go and read a book. But it can be better. Look at that. Really horrible. First of all, they've used red on blue, which is a dazzling color. You can't even read it. But it looks very impressive. PowerPoint has all these templates and lovely things. So why not use them and show that you know PowerPoint, even if you don't know about dengue. And it can get even better. There you are. Lovely animations from PowerPoint. Pictures which scroll and float and appear impressive. Shows how much Microsoft can do shows how much you know to do with PowerPoint. Don't ever use slides like this. They are awful. They can get worse in only one sense. It can get worse if you have a Sinhala Saralagi in the background to illustrate your point. So don't make slides like this. They are not scientific. They don't give you anything new. They don't illustrate your point well, and they are basically horrible. This is what you should write, how you should do a slide. Take it. And you have some points. You go through those points, animating one by one so that the audience focuses on one point at a time, and you speak what you have to say. Dengue is a flavivirus, and there are 4 serotypes. It is transmitted by the Aedes group of mosquitoes, and Aedes groups of mosquitoes are found in these localities. The incidence is rising. It's usually a simple fever, but some people get a severe disease. How much better this simple slide is compared to this? Most of the facts are there in this, but who's going to read them? So always keep it simple like this. 3 basic rules. Keep it simple. Simplicity is an art. To be able to convert something which is complicated into something simple is a real art. Be brief. Brevity is the soul of wit. And be precise, as Thomson and Thompson used to say. Be precise and clear, simple and brief. Less is more. If you show less to the audience, you can talk more and impress upon them the importance of the key points. Create subsections in your presentation so that people know that you are talking about one particular area. Avoid clutter, make it readable. Use visuals, but use them carefully. And always check your spelling. There is no excuse for not knowing how to spell because there is a spell check in your Microsoft Word, in your Microsoft PowerPoint. When you're presenting, think outside the box. You don't always have to use bullets. I haven't used bullets. See how you can make it easier to understand. See how you can illustrate your point better. Don't shoot yourself in the foot with bullets. Bulleted points are good, but they don't always have to be. I think Pandula, who is speaking later, will show you other innovative means to show the same thing. Ask yourself, how can the same thing be said more simply? Decorate your talk with facts, not imagery. No one is interested in seeing something rolling across the screen. That's good for a computer game. But you decorate your talk with real hard facts and good stuff, and then the audience will listen. And ask yourself at times, can a picture say it better? Can an animation say it better? And if a picture or an animation can say your message better, by all means use it. But if it doesn't enhance the quality of the presentation, then for goodness sake, don't use it. There are some general rules when you design PowerPoint slides. Usually one slide is one message, 1 to 2 slides per minute. Clearly state what the message on the slide is. Take your audience's attention and say, this is what I want to say from this slide. Use the 6 by 6 rule, 6 lines per slide, 6 words per line. I've slightly broken that, but that's a general rule. Use simple sentences, simple words. Avoid jargon unless the audience understands it. We don't want big words. We just want to understand what we have to say. For example, you can say in your study, to show how much you know about scientific terminology and large words, a significant proportion of geriatric individuals recruited to the study were of the male gender. What you are trying to say is that most older patients were men. So why not simply say most older patients were men instead of talking all this big stuff? You are not impressing the audience. The audience doesn't understand what on earth you're talking about because the audience would have switched off by then. Colors and templates. Now be warned about this. As I said from the beginning, I like white on black for a scientific presentation. If I talk about something a little broader, I might use a few templates, and there's nothing wrong with that. But white on black, black on white, white on blue are the classical colors for presentations. You may use a template, and Microsoft Office has now got some lovely templates where you can use colors and stuff. Use them if they are appropriate. Don't use multiple colors on a single slide, and never use dazzling colors. White on blue and blue, sorry, red on blue and blue on red dazzles. As you can see, the letters shimmer and you can't read them. It's very irritating to the eye. So when you use colors, use a few colors if you wish, don't complicate it, and basically less colors the better. Now with all these colors, the word L in colors is also vanished. Tables and figures are useful, but look at this figure. How illustrative it is. What does it tell you? You have drawn a complicated pie diagram to point out the fact that 60% of the group were men. You could have said this in a single line, 60% were men, instead of which you waste time making a slide and waste time showing it to the audience. So don't use tables and figures which don't convey anything. This is a reasonable slide. It shows a sequence of things that you are going to do. It's a little bit complicated, but it gives you on the left-hand side a few images to show what has been actually done, real-life images. And on your other side, it has a sequence of an experiment. So it illustrates the point, and it's easier to understand than writing it out in text. Animations, use them if they are going to have an impact. Now here you have a nice simple table, and you have a second table which interprets the first table, and then you have the relevant references. And down here, sorry, there is no point. Yes, there's a pointer here. You have your key statement. There's good agreement between these things. So that's the way animation has been used to prevent the mind from being clouded by a lot of things. So you show one aspect first, the more important aspect which is derived from them later, and then finally the reference. If you had all these together, the audience switches off because there's too much material in the slide. But here it comes stepwise and it has some kind of flow. This is an example of a graph, a picture. And as you can see, I have written here the key conclusion. So even if you don't understand any of these things, you know what the final message is. Well, effective use of a picture. Now this is an ineffective use of a picture. Don't ever use a diagram like this. It's a very good diagram. It gives you all the possible flow chart things for the management of pneumothorax. But if you put this up on a screen, can any of you really understand it in the 1 minute at the most that you have to show it? No. So don't. Just remove it and say, if you want to know how to manage pneumothorax, please refer to this diagram which is in this journal and give the link. And then somebody will go and look at it. But this kind of detailed diagram is basically useless on a slide. This is a reasonably good diagram which shows you what happens and which you can talk about and say oxidant-induced damage is a result of increased oxidative stress. It acts on proteins and lipids. With proteins, protein carbonyl is increased. With lipids, lipid peroxide is increased. And oxidative stress also reduces antioxidant capacity. So you can talk about it, and the animation is simple and appropriate. Pictures must be relevant to the talk, must be used to illustrate a point, and please crop them to size, to the correct size you want, and get the aspect ratio right. There is nothing more horrible than a picture which is stretched. Videos are good, but have a major danger in them that you might run the video and it might not actually start. You might be left with this message, very embarrassing in the middle of a big audience, and it can happen very easily. So generally speaking, unless you're very, very sure of your IT skills, try to avoid using videos. Pay attention to detail, use a clear layout, well-aligned text, define your abbreviations if they are non-standard, check your spelling and your grammar that is deliberately misspelled, make sure items on the slide don't overlap, make sure your graphs are labeled clearly, and add slide numbers so that you give a rough idea to the audience where you stand on the sequence of the slides. As Niranjan said, how do you get to Royal Albert Hall? Royal Albert Hall is where they play music. You practice, practice, practice. Because there is no quick way to get to Royal Albert Hall. You have to practice, practice, and make perfect. And always keep to time. Cardinal principle. So be ready when you go for your presentation. Don't be unprepared. Don't get caught out. Take a lot of time and effort to do a good job. You owe it to your audience to do a good job. If you do a slipshod job, you will be remembered as somebody who wasted the time of the audience. Now, in the next few minutes, we have about 10 minutes left as far as I can see. And I'm going to talk a little more, in a little more detail on a very focused area, and that is how to present a free paper. Because all of you at some point will be presenting your own research. And it's important how to do it. So this is very specific stuff. This is not the broad stuff that I was talking about before. When you present your findings, you've done a study, SLMA, CCP has accepted it for an oral presentation, and you want to present your data to the audience to impress them. There is usually a prize lurking around, and you want to get that prize as well. First prize in the CCP or whatever, or the Vijay Rama prize for the SLMA, and your target should be to aim high and get that prize. So you usually follow what is called the IMRAD format: introduction, methods, results, and discussion or conclusions. In simple terms, you must tell the audience, why did I do this study? How did I do this study? What did I find? And so what does it mean? So why, how, what, and so what? So I did a big study. What does it mean in the end? This is what it means. I'll go through an example. So in your introduction, you would state the problem in brief. Leptospirosis causes severe illness in some patients. Then you will briefly review the literature. Don't get stuck in this area in great detail because you will run out of time, the bell will ring and you will be out. So you say a few things that so and so said this, so and so said this, and therefore this is why we thought of doing this study. Then you state your hypothesis and objectives. Oxidative stress-induced damage may result in severe leptospirosis. Therefore, we measured protein carbonyl levels in patients with severe leptospirosis. In your method section, you must describe the study design. Describe the sample. Whom did you study? What was the group? And describe what you did. We measured protein carbonyl levels in these patients. You must describe the instruments and measurements you used. Describe the statistical methods. And when you describe statistical methods, a common mistake people make is they say, we used SPSS to analyze the data. SPSS is not a robot. It doesn't analyze data for you. It is not a computer. It cannot understand. Statistical methodology is the statistical method that you used in detail. So describe those statistical methods and always talk about your ethics clearance that you have got. In your results, the title of each result slide should detail the key findings. The first slide generally gives the baseline demographic data, and then you have 3 to 4 slides detailing the main findings. Where possible and where appropriate, illustrate your results with tables and charts. For example, your demographic slide will be something like this. Now, this is a cut and paste of a journal article. So the lazy presenter does this. The obsessive compulsive disorder presenter does this. And he writes out, he copies that table into a more readable format, larger, fills the slide better, and generally looks better. Take that extra bit of trouble. Don't be lazy and cut something out of a paper and put it there. Type it out and make it look nice. And make a statement at the bottom which tells you what has been found in this slide. This is a reasonable example of a chart. So you show this chart and then you say what the chart means. Confirmed leptospirosis levels, protein carbonyl levels are higher than in dengue and healthy controls, etc., etc. You are stating what the findings of this chart are. Many people might not understand what the chart means, but they will understand what you are trying to say. In your discussion and conclusions, restate the key findings. protein carbonyl levels are raised in severe leptospirosis. Put your findings in context with the published literature. Our hypothesis was correct. Other studies have shown the same thing. Therefore, we were correct. Our theory was right. And it's in line with what has been studied before. And then state how generalizable the findings are and the limitations. Is this generalizable? Can it be used everywhere in the world? Can it be used in other communities in Sri Lanka? What is its impact? Don't forget to state the limitations. Don't go and say we did the perfect study. Say what we couldn't do. We could not measure serial levels. And then say what this study leads to. Future studies will be done to measure serial levels. End your presentation with a list of appropriate references, preferably your own references to your own studies, and finish off by thanking the people who have participated in the study. Common mistakes. Don't ever overconclude. Sometimes when you have done a tiny little study in one small clinic, you think, my gosh, this is life-changing. This is the biggest thing that has ever been found. And you go and make a statement in your presentation saying protein carbonyl is the sole reason for severe disease. That is stupid. We all know that's not the case. And don't make recommendations which cannot be derived from your study. For example, as a result of my finding, where I have studied 50 patients, all hospitals should be equipped with facilities to measure protein carbonyl levels immediately. A meaningless recommendation which will make you look foolish. And finally, keep to time strictly. In an oral presentation, generally if you don't keep the time, you get kicked out at the end because the presentation stops and the lights go off. So keep to time. Finally, remember that your presentation is one moment in time. One moment where you get an opportunity for people to listen to you and an opportunity for you to disseminate something you have found and impress the audience that you have done some useful work which will change things in the future. So it's one moment in time, and you're asking for the time of the audience which is of value and which is a valuable thing. Make sure you respect that and use that time effectively and take that extra effort to make that one moment in time a glorious one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. There's a question, sir. You have already typed out a short answer. I thought we could use this time to elaborate on it.
I think I'm just trying to get the screen back. Yeah.
Yes. Sir, there's a question asking, do you recommend one or two distraction slides or refreshing slides in between a lengthy presentation?
As I said, there shouldn't be a thing called a lengthy presentation. It should be short. So that is the basic principle. The optimum time for a presentation is about 40 minutes. Beyond that, people apparently fall asleep. But I have seen presentations where people put up in the middle of things, let's take a break and look at some elephants. In a scientific presentation, I don't recommend it. I wonder what Niranjan would say about it. Niranjan, you're there?
Yes, I'm there, but I will not put the video on.
That's okay. Can hear you well.
Okay. Was there a question for me?
No, somebody asked a question whether you would use distractor slides in the middle of your presentation. So you're talking about something long, a lengthy presentation, and then in the middle to break the monotony, you put up a slide, a picture of a temple or an elephant or a dolphin or something like that, just to break the sequence. Personally, I'm not very much in favor of it. Basically, I feel that a presentation shouldn't be too long. And the way to avoid the monotony is to make your presentation brief. But I was wondering whether you had any views on it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Professor. 100%. It should be brief, and putting the distractor slide, I think, will distract the audience. There is a rule: whatever slide you have has to be relevant to your presentation. So if it's not relevant, I mean, putting an elephant or something, if that elephant is not relevant to the presentation, immediately the audience will wonder, what did that elephant have to do with your presentation? So it is not recommended. And the latest research shows that the time frame that you can keep the undivided attention of the audience is about 20 to 25 minutes.
Absolutely.
So that's why in conferences and all, most of the keynotes are 20 to 25 minutes, because for 20 to 25 minutes, you can keep the undivided attention of the audience. Thereafter, your mind tends to drift away here and there.
Absolutely.
But as you mentioned, Professor Senaka Rajapakse, if it's a scientific presentation, we can elongate it up to about 45 minutes. Is that right?
Actually, no, we shouldn't. I know it's in conflict with this our own presentation. 20 minutes is optimal, because beyond that, people fall asleep. And if you can't say it in 20 minutes, then you probably don't need to say it at all. So I think 20 minutes is a good time period. Most of the conferences now go for 20. You can stretch it to about 30. 25 with 5 minutes for questions is probably the optimal time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next question, sir, about the references. When it comes to a scientific presentation, how much of attention do we give our references? Do we just list them out, or should we take time to individually mention and maybe acknowledge the references?
Probably not go into too much detail about the references, because the references are out there for you to look at. You might, if it's a very important reference, you might want to give the audience a little time to note down the reference so that they can go and read it up. But normally we would just put up a screen with the list of references and just leave it at that point, and not really discuss in great detail about each reference. References are just there for reference purposes. Okay.
Right. Okay. So next question is, there is a question just came in. How do we address the review literature in introduction slide? How to say, yes.
Okay. So in the introduction slide, normally if you are quoting somebody else's work, you would say, if I go back to my presentation, I just mentioned a few examples, and you would say Rodrigo et al. Would have said something like this. But when you read it out, that's not what you would say. You would say a previous study by a group where, say, by Rodrigo and other authors showed these findings. You et al. Is okay, but if you want to be simple, you can just say a study by Rodrigo and others stated this. So that's all you need to say. You don't need to refer to the study. What I would normally do is, when you put up a reference like that, at the bottom of the slide, you have a little reference to that study so that somebody can note that down and keep it and look at it later. Can I move on with the next question? Because there is a question on what is the maximum number of slides.
Yes.
So the maximum number of slides is determined. The maximum number of slides is determined by the length of the presentation. On average, a slide, it's 1 to 2 slides per minute. If it's a detailed slide with a lot of material, then it will probably be 1 slide per minute. If it's a quick thing, it will be 2 slides per minute. And there's always a little play between them, because some slides will take longer. So a rough estimate is, if you have a 10-minute presentation, you are really looking at about 20 slides, maybe 15 to 20 slides. If there's a lot of material on the slides, a bit less. So there is no maximum slides if you can get away with it. I had about 47 slides, but I got away with it because some of the slides were just flashing through. So the basic timing is 1 to 2 slides a minute, and better go for the lower number than for the larger number. Then there's another question, is it recommended to put a thank you slide in? And I think it's not a bad thing to do. I sometimes avoid it. I just say thank you at the end. If you want to have a thank you slide, by all means say thank you. It's a courteous thing to do. Preferably don't have any roses and things on the slide, just say thank you. Then there's another question, what is the difference between presentation and lecture? Why lectures are more than 1 hour? Well, lectures shouldn't be more than 1 hour. In fact, as Niranjan said, most of the evidence has shown that if it's 20 minutes to 1 hour, it's enough. And lecture should never go on for more than an hour. And they shouldn't go on for even an hour, they should be 40 minutes. A presentation, I think Dr. Gunrath has asked what the difference between a presentation and lecture. A lecture is usually something, I don't think these are really defined, but a lecture is usually something where you talk about work which is not your own. You talk about facts and data which is not your own work. And a presentation is where you present your own findings, but I don't think these are defined at all. Pandoli, you have any views on it?
No, I think you have explained it.
Then standard font type. Again, a matter of choice, what you use. It depends on what your style is going to be, but the font size should be readable. And as I said, it's 6 lines per slide, 6 bullets, that is, with the title, and 6 words per line. So if you stick to that, Ishan, you can go for a reasonable font size. But what I basically do is try to see what fits on the slide. But the larger the font, generally it's better. But remember also that the mind, when it reads a document, likes to have some space in between. So don't make the letters, the fonts too close to each other. There should be sufficient space around, because the mind understands things better if there is a lot of space. And the type, well, you can use, I tend to use a sans serif type. That is a type which is like Calibri or Arial, where there is no, there are no those little lines and things at the end of the letters. I think Pandula will show them later, hopefully. But it's up to you. It's generally thought that more arrogant people use sans serif fonts and more polite people use the serif fonts, but that's just a matter of opinion. The serif fonts are supposed to be softer, but there is no rule on that. Then do the first slide mention about the presenter? Generally, yes, because you want, if you have you don't have to mention the presenter alone, but if it's a study with a list of people, you would list the authors in the presentation, the authors for the study in the first slide, and maybe underline the presenter, but it's not mandatory. You should not generally use your qualifications and all that sort of thing, and not even what you are, but your affiliation is important, because you generally represent an organization and you should be proud to represent your organization. If I'm speaking on behalf of the Ceylon College of Physicians, I would write Senaka Rajapakse. I would say University of Colombo or Ceylon College of Physicians or whatever, just to acknowledge that you come representing an organization. I wouldn't put my qualifications, these MDs and MRCPs and FRCPs and stuff, because that looks a bit odd. It looks as you're trying to advertise. And interesting question, when you do a presentation for doctors, do you use the title doctor? No, I prefer not to. Some people do, but you would have noticed that I didn't. Then I think if they know you, you're better off not using the term doctor, because among doctors, we should all be colleagues. And even if it's for non-doctors, I still wouldn't use the doctor. I would use the name and the affiliation, the institution to which I am affiliated. Do we need to mention references, textbooks, and slides? Then not essential. Some people do it if there are important references, but it's not mandatory. And then can we use Prezi type of presentation? Yes, you can, but it's tricky, and the risk of something going wrong is great. So there were instances where, when I was more junior and wanted to have fancy sort of stuff on slides, I have experimented with these things. My advice is go for PowerPoint, because almost every computer in the country has PowerPoint. So when you use fancy methods, they are impressive, but then they detract from the actual presentation itself. It just has all sorts of fancy stuff. But as I said from the beginning, keep it simple. Simple slides, basic stuff. The slide is merely an aid to what you have to speak. So there is nothing gained in using a fancy presentation template or a fancy presentation platform, and the risk of your plugging your USB drive into the computer and the whole thing not working at all is extremely high. I wouldn't take that risk.
Another question popped in, sir.
Right.
For what
To what
extent should we explain the statistical methods used? Yes.
I assume you are speaking of a scientific, the presentation of the findings of a study. You wouldn't go into great detail with the statistical methods because no one is really interested. You would list the statistical methods that you have used. You can put your findings and at the bottom say odds ratio and etc., standard deviations, all that. But you don't have to explain how it was done. That is completely unnecessary. What you will do is, what does it mean? So if the odds ratio is 2, then what does this mean as far as this study is concerned? Does it mean that the findings are significant or not? So the confidence interval, how do you interpret it? You will say, we use the odds ratio for this purpose, and this is the finding, or we used an ROC curve, and our findings show that the two parameters are similar or not. So I wouldn't go into great detail, but you must list the statistical methods that you are used. Is it essential to add faculty logo, university logo on the slide if the presentation of department? I think it's courtesy, because we get these opportunities to present because of our background and the institutes we are affiliated to. If I was not in the University of Colombo, it is less likely that I would have been invited to do this talk. So it's kind of keeping the flag flying and showing that you represent your institution and you're selling your institution and showing that your institution is a strong one which is doing this work. So it's a courtesy, but it is certainly not essential. I normally do it if it's a formal presentation, but it's not really essential in every slide. Maybe on the first slide, you might just put it up and then move on. But every slide, probably not necessary.
One final question, sir. Do you agree with keeping the question and answers or the discussion part of the presentation at the end, or do you also think we can take it simultaneously all throughout the presentation if there are questions?
Generally, it depends on the type of presentation. Interactive presentations where the audience can raise their hand and ask a question is good. But some speakers will find that it interrupts the flow. And the second thing is it might interrupt the timing. And you might end up you having run out of time because you are answering questions in the middle. So normally for most presentations, you would finish your presentations and take questions at the end. If it's a workshop open style thing, then it's acceptable to have questions asked in between. Normally most presentations, we would ask questions right at the end and people will keep their questions and then ask them because you might otherwise run out of time.
Thank you very much, sir. I think that's it for the question.